So, a snail in a bottle of ginger beer. What on earth does that have to do with your life today? Well, it turns out a whole lot, actually. We're going to dive into a wild story about a court case from nearly 100 years ago that completely flipped the script on how we think about responsibility. And trust me, it affects you pretty much every single day. Okay, so let's just start with a big, kind of weird question. Think about it. Could you ever be held legally responsible for the safety of a complete stranger? I mean, someone you've never even met. For the longest time, the answer the law gave was, well, it was pretty narrow and maybe not what you'd expect.
Yeah, for ages and ages, the law was super simple, almost too simple. It basically said if you don't have a contract with someone, a piece of paper saying you've got an agreement, then you don't owe them a thing. Zero responsibility. Now, you can probably see the giant hole this creates, right? Imagine a company makes a faulty product. The only person who could sue them was the shop owner who bought it from the factory. Not you, the person who actually got hurt using it. It just didn't make a lot of sense.
And that's where this idea of a general duty of care comes in. It's the concept that finally filled that massive gap. Basically, it's the idea that, hey, maybe we all have this fundamental baseline responsibility to just not be careless in a way that's going to hurt other people. Simple, right? But here's the thing. This idea didn't just magically appear. It had to be forged in a legal battle. Which brings us to the landmark case, the real turning point. And it all kicked off because of one, well, let's be honest, one really, really gross incident that forced the courts to literally rethink the entire concept of responsibility. The case is Donahue versus Stevenson. And if you've ever been near a law book, you know this one. It's one of the most famous cases ever. And it all starts so innocently. A woman, Mae Donahue, is at a cafe. Her friend buys her a ginger beer. But what she was about to find inside that bottle, well, it would go on to make legal history. So the court's final decision introduced this idea that was, on the one hand, incredibly simple, but at the time, it was completely radical. It's called the neighbor principle. And believe me, it is the absolute heart of this whole story.
This right here, this is the golden quote from the judge, Lord Adkin. Now, when you read it, it just sounds like common sense, doesn't it? Almost sounds like something you'd hear in a Sunday school lesson. But back in 1932, to put this into law, whoa, that was a game changer. It meant your responsibility wasn't just about contracts anymore. It was about anyone you could reasonably guess might be affected by what you do.
So if we boil it down, this whole principle really rests on three simple ideas. First, take reasonable care. We're not talking about being perfect, just acting like a normal, sensible person would. Second, avoid foreseeable harm. The damage has to be something you could have predicted. And third, you owe this duty to your neighbor.
Okay, so that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Who on earth is my neighbor in a legal sense? Well, it's definitely not just the person who lives next door. The court defined it as anyone who is so closely and directly impacted by what you do that you really should have been thinking about them. So going back to our story, it's the person who's actually going to drink the ginger beer you put in that bottle.
And the fallout from this one simple idea, I mean, it was massive. We're not talking about a small tweak to the rules here. The neighbor principle literally gave birth to a whole new area of law. You can really think of this case as drawing a bright line in the sand. There's a clear before 1932 and an after 1932. Before, everything was chained to contracts. After, it was all about what's foreseeable and what we owe each other, just as members of a society. At the end of the day, Donahue versus Stevenson is the bedrock. It's the foundation for what we now call modern negligence law. Seriously, every time you hear about a lawsuit for carelessness, whether it's someone slipping on a wet floor in a store or something huge like a big industrial disaster, the legal DNA of that case traces right back to this one. So what this principle really did was give courts the power they needed to enforce duties even when there was no written agreement. That's what lawyers call tort duties. It completely shattered the idea that you needed a contract to be held responsible, and in its place, it built the entire system of negligence law that we live with today.
All right, so a decomposed snail, a bottle of ginger beer, a dusty old court case from 1932. It's a great story, but why should you, sitting here right now, actually care?
Because this isn't some abstract legal theory. This applies to all of us, every single day, in pretty much everything we do. You get behind the wheel of a car, boom, you have a duty of care to every other driver and pedestrian out there. A coffee shop serves you a latte, they have a duty of care to make sure it's safe. This principle is literally woven into the fabric of modern life. It's the invisible rulebook for how we have to look out for each other.
And that really leaves us with one big question to chew on, doesn't it? In our world today, this crazy, interconnected digital world, who are the people so closely and directly affected by what you do? When you post something online, when you develop an app, when you share information, who is your neighbor now? I bet that circle of responsibility is a whole lot wider than any of us think.